The final few kilometers along the road to Misrata are lined with new checkpoints, manned by forces loyal to Libya's National Transitional Council. Where are you going? Did you register, they ask us? No one can enter the city without a document from the transitional government confirming they are not a Gaddafi supporter. We too have to show our credentials. At the checkpoint, we meet Khalid al-Shahoumi. Under the Gaddafi regime, he spent 6 months in prison. He says he was tortured there because he joined the rebel fighters. This graffiti says traitors not wanted. Here at the checkpoint, they're searching for Gaddafi supporters and for weapons. Khalid is a car mechanic and is working here as a volunteer. He says he's doing his bit for the revolution. Khalid tells us people with no blood on their hands are welcome in the city, but not anyone who killed in the name of the Gaddafi regime. Death to the traitors, he says. Misrata suffered heavy damage in the fighting. Once a wealthy business hub, it was besieged for months. More than 4,000 people died in the fighting. Their families have written their names on the walls in remembrance. Misrata was liberated 4 months ago, but its future is uncertain. At one of the few markets that are still open in Misrata, the locals tell us Libya would still be in the grip of the Gaddafi regime if it hadn't been for their city's heroism. It was us here in Misrata who broke Gaddafi's back and no one else. And now we ask? We'll keep on fighting, he says, but we don't know where Gaddafi is. This golden fist statue was placed here in recognition of Misrata's efforts. Anti-Gaddafi rebels removed it from Tripoli when they took the capital. There is now an impromptu anti-war museum around it. Anna Sha'aban says these grenades were fired at them by Gaddafi's forces. But he tells us the war is not yet over. He says thousands of fighters from Misrata are still in action on the front line. Anas is also a fighter. He hasn't been to school for months. He says that if he doesn't fight, if his friends don't fight, if nobody fights, Gaddafi could return. Probably not the man himself, but his followers. The 18-year-old invites us to his home. For weeks, mortars were landing all around the house. Anas tells his younger brothers and sisters to come out of the ruins, warning them there could be mines around. Anas's father, Jamal Sha'aban, shows the damaged house. He says he replaced the windows 2 weeks ago. They had all been blown out. Pieces of shrapnel litter the area. Jamal says the family were terrified, but they stayed in their home. They got more resistant as the fighting went on. They're a family of civilians, he says. His son had never even had a gun in his hand before. Never even seen one, in fact. In the kitchen, we meet Jamal's wife, Najat Miftah, and their daughter, Aya. They're both very worried about Anas. They don't want him to go back to the front, but they can understand his motivation. They tell me the siege was the worst thing they've ever experienced. They had to learn how to use a machine gun in case they needed to defend themselves. Najat tells me during the siege they wanted their voice to be heard by the outside world, but they had no television or radio or even electricity. We wanted to tell our opponents that Libyans should not be killing their fellow Libyans, she says, that they shouldn't let their children shoot at us, but nobody heard their voices. Najat is a teacher, but school where she works is still closed, so she's using her spare time to help the cause. Up to 250 women prepare food in this kitchen every day for the fighters on the front lines. They also take the food to local hospitals where injured fighters are treated. Najat says the situation can only improve when security gets better. Working together helps these women deal with the experiences of war too. Many of them lost children or husbands in the fighting. It's difficult for them to come to terms with the way their loved ones were taken from them. This woman says she cannot forgive. What should I forgive, she asks? The fact that they killed one of her sons and crippled her other one? Or that they destroyed people's homes and raped women? We hear about increasing arrests of Gaddafi supporters. There is talk of violence and even torture. We decide to investigate. After much negotiation, we are granted an interview with Ibrahim Schülke. The trained lawyer is the new chief of police in Misrata, and it is part of his job to seek out Gaddafi followers. The police chief tells us he doesn't believe there have been any violent incidents in the institutions under his command. He admits there have been acts of vengeance and torture, but they weren't organized campaigns. He says that even though he can understand why someone would resort to that, he will not tolerate it. Such cases are investigated, and if necessary, the case is prepared for trial. The police chief agrees to let us visit the prison. When we arrive, we learn he has phoned ahead and fear a show will be put on for our camera. But we are given free access to all areas. More than 800 men are imprisoned in this former school building. They include mercenaries and civilians whose names the anti-Gaddafi fighters found in the regime's command centers. There are also ordinary soldiers here, like Mohammed and his comrades. They say they've been imprisoned unfairly. Mohammed tells us he didn't know about the revolution in Misrata and says he didn't choose to come here to kill people. The soldier says his commanding officers told him they were there to protect civilians and their homes. The troops didn't know what was going on. Their mobile phones and their passports were confiscated. They were lied to, says Mohammed, and asks where the officers and generals are now. Not in this prison, he says. On the way back to their cells, the prisoners say they have been well treated. The cell, a former classroom, is shared by 10 men. Many don't want to be recognized, fearing vengeance attacks. No one can tell them how long they will be held here. They cannot expect a trial until there is a functioning government, laws and judiciary. As we leave Misrata after 3 days, we have the impression it's a city holding its breath. It's clear Misrata has paid a high price, and it will be some time before it can return to business as usual. The people of Misrata will need peace and security in their city before they can begin building a new post-Gaddafi Libya.